Diana Ross was always presented as immaculate. The hair, the smile, the voice that seemed untouchable. But behind that carefully polished image, there were files no one ever meant for the public to see. According to a former member of the Supremes, Diana once kept a private list of 5 lesbian artists she was said to have loved, women she later viewed as rivals she could never forgive. That list was never officially released. It was never printed, never read aloud on any stage. Yet, according to whispers inside the African American music scene of the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds, it functioned like a quiet curse. Some insiders claimed it confirmed what had long been speculated about Diana's sexuality. Detroit, in the late 1,950 seconds, was a city built on Motown dreams, where young black girls waited for their chance to step out of the projects and into the spotlight. In that landscape, Florence Ballard crossed paths with Diana Ross, an encounter that, according to those who were there, began one of the most shadowy and ambiguous relationships in American music history. The two eventually joined the Primes, the group that would evolve into the Supremes. People who traveled with them said they didn't just share dreams of fame. It was rumored they shared beds on the road, long overnight bus rides that seemed endless, and quiet glances that revealed more than any spoken confession of love ever could. Within the local music community, the whispers started. Something was happening between Florence and Diana, something unspoken, something people felt but didn't dare name. Years later, a former member of the Supremes recalled Florence making a chilling remark. According to this account, Florence once said, "Diana and I had nights where we didn't need stage lights, just each other." No one can say with certainty what really happened inside those dim motel rooms in Ohio or Michigan. But for those living that life, musicians, road managers, backup singers, the signs were clear. Lingering looks, hands held just a little too long. Cold nights where, it was said, only an embrace kept them warm. None of it felt accidental. For Florence, people believed it was love fierce, consuming, but forced underground. For Diana, some thought it was just a phase, a strategic emotional game she could walk away from when it no longer served her. When the Supremes signed with Motown in 1963, Florence still believed that if their love was real, it wouldn't be erased by the bright lights of fame. But Berry Gordy reportedly saw something different in Diana. Not just a singer, but a perfect image. She was graceful, composed, marketable. Florence, with her thunderous, soulful voice, slowly got pushed out of focus, not only in the stage arrangements, but, as some claimed, in the heart of the woman who had once fallen asleep beside her on worn-out mattresses in cheap hotel rooms. Diana Ross became the official lead singer. Florence stepped back, learning how to smile when she was no longer allowed to take center stage, learning how to stay quiet when the spotlight moved somewhere else. For Florence, the cruelest cut wasn't losing her position in the group. It was feeling erased by the person who knew every breath she took in the dark. Diana, according to witnesses, began to pull away. Florence kept believing there was still something left between them, a bond that hadn't completely disappeared. But in 1966, that illusion shattered when Berry Gordy decided to rename the group Diana Ross and the Supremes. It wasn't just a marketing move. To Florence, those words on a marquee felt like a verdict. From that moment on, Florence Ballard was treated like a shadow. The late-night conversations faded. The shared laughter dissolved into distant politeness. The same woman who had once crawled into her bed on the road now walked past her in hallways under the Motown logo. Florence began spending more time alone backstage, a drink in her hand, swallowing the questions nobody would answer, forcing a smile whenever the press asked about how close the group still was. Mary Wilson later recalled seeing Florence standing behind the curtain, silently watching Diana perform, not with petty jealousy, but with the hollow stare of someone watching a piece of their own heart being displayed on stage and then taken away. In June 1967, Florence arrived late at the studio to record In and Out of Love. She was, according to multiple witnesses, drunk, pregnant, and visibly disheveled, the complete opposite of the polished image Motown demanded. Some people laughed. Others whispered, "She's done. They're going to get rid of her." Diana reportedly offered nothing. No defense. No explanation, just a distant, unreadable look. That same night, in a hotel room in Las Vegas, it was rumored, Florence confronted Diana face to face. With her voice breaking, she was said to have told her, "You know I loved you, but you chose to be the queen." Within hours, Florence Ballard was fired from the group. There was no formal notice, no heartfelt meeting, no official statement addressed to her. She only realized what had happened when she arrived at the venue and saw another woman, Cindy Birdsong, standing where she used to stand. Diana still went on stage that night, still sang, still smiled, still wore the glittering gown. She did not look back. Florence tried to rebuild. Her solo career began with a contract at ABC Records in 1968, but it collapsed almost immediately. The first single failed. The planned album was shelved. According to those close to her, no one from Motown reached out. There was no phone call from Diana, no letter, no "Are you okay?" Just static and silence. In the dim light of her modest Detroit home, Florence raised her 3 children while living in near poverty. It was said that she once sent an anonymous letter to the Motown offices, ending with a line that read, "If you ever loved me, don't forget, I once lived." By 1974, the name Florence Ballard had all but disappeared from the public memory. In a conversation with an old friend believed by some to have been Mary Wilson, Florence reportedly spoke in a voice that sounded more like surrender than anger. "She took everything from me," Florence said, "even my heart." 2 years later, on the 22nd of February 1976, Florence Ballard died of heart failure. She was only 32 years old. There were no breaking news alerts, no TV specials, no major tributes, just a small notice buried in the back pages of a local paper. Her funeral was held at a small church in Detroit. When the casket was carried in, the room fell silent for a different reason. Diana Ross walked in with a bodyguard at her side. No advance announcement, no embrace for the grieving family, no visible tears. She simply stood there, distant. According to one former Motown associate who attended, Diana didn't show up to say goodbye. In their words, she came to make sure the past stayed buried. After Florence's death, her name was quietly removed from most Supremes tributes for more than 2 decades. When Diana Ross was asked in an interview about her former bandmate, she reportedly just said, "I always wish her peace." Nothing more. No smile. No crack in her composure. As if Florence had been a passing name on a long list, rather than a woman who once shared her bed, her stage, and possibly her heart. Yet for those who knew the early days, Florence Ballard never really vanished. She still exists in old photographs, in obscure recordings from the Supremes' first years, and in the stories passed between people who were actually there, not just as a forgotten voice, but according to many who tell this story, as the first woman Diana Ross ever loved in secret, and the first woman she allowed to be buried so she could claim the crown alone. Mary Wilson was said to be the last person who ever held Diana Ross's hand in genuine affection, and the first one brave enough to throw that same heart back at her. Their story didn't begin with a dramatic confession or end with a screaming match. It unfolded like a quiet wound, one that never fully healed and never fully closed. The bond between Mary and Diana wasn't just the story of 2 members of the Supremes drifting apart. It was the tragedy of someone who loved in silence, who carried secrets she could never speak aloud, and who was then pushed so far down the list that it was as if she had never been there at all. In 1959, inside the Brewster Douglas housing project in Detroit, Mary Wilson met Diana Ross. They were both only 15, 2 black teenage girls in poverty, clinging to the same fragile dream, to sing, to escape, to one day hear their names echoing from a radio speaker. Mary had a dependable, steady voice. Diana, people said, had a face built for album covers and posters. At first, there was no rivalry, no competition. Just 2 girls leaning on each other, whispering about a future bigger than the concrete walls that surrounded them. On early tours, they shared a bed. Officially, it was because money was tight and rooms were limited, but those who traveled with them claimed there was another reason. Diana was afraid of being alone at night. Mary was the one who wrapped her arms around her, the one who held her hand in the darkness when a door slammed in the hallway or the wind rattled the thin motel windows. People close to the group remembered seeing them like that, two figures on a narrow mattress, fingers intertwined, as if sleep itself needed to be negotiated together. But when the stage lights came on, whatever existed between them had no name. On the 23rd of June 1965, at the Fox Theater in Detroit, the shift became impossible to ignore. In the middle of a performance, Diana stepped forward and, according to witnesses, simply took the lead vocal, pushing past the established arrangement. In that moment, Mary understood clearer than any speech that the girl she had once shared blankets and secrets with was no longer the same. Backstage, in a cramped dressing room filled with makeup fumes and overheated lights, Mary pulled Diana aside and shouted, "What are you doing?" According to those who heard about the confrontation later, Diana didn't apologize, didn't raise her voice, didn't bother defending herself. She just laughed softly and whispered, "Who else is better suited for the spotlight than me?" It wasn't an argument. It was a statement of intent. From that night on, Mary began to move backward in Diana's life. Not only in the stage lineup, where Diana now occupied the center, but in the quiet spaces where they had once been inseparable. The hugs stopped. The spontaneous notes and letters Diana used to write faded away. The long, wordless glances they once shared across hotel rooms or recording studios turned into quick, polite looks that slid off like raindrops on glass. By the 14th of January 1970, at the Frontier Theater in Las Vegas, the distance between them had turned into a chasm. That night, Diana officially walked away from the Supremes. When she stepped off stage for the last time as their lead singer, there was no backward look, no final squeeze of the hand, no whispered goodbye. Mary stood just behind the curtain, gripping the microphone so tightly that, according to those who saw it, her hands turned red and nearly bled. Her eyes filled with tears that never actually fell. Back in the dressing room, in a moment few knew about at the time, Mary was said to have smashed a mirror and drawn a thin cut across her own palm, a small scar to remember, in her words, that "once I was hurt by a woman I thought was family." After that night, Diana Ross never called her again. At every reunion discussion, every industry gathering, Mary's name seemed to fall a little further down the list. On the 3rd of May 1975, during a private meeting in Los Angeles about a possible reunion show, the imbalance became brutal on paper. Mary reportedly sat alone in a hallway for 45 minutes before being invited into the room. The proposed contract laid everything bare. Diana's name was valued at $1.5 million. Mary's fee was listed at just $75,000, with no creative control, no say over the set list, and no right to match Diana's costumes or billing. She was expected to stand beside the Queen, nothing more. Mary, according to witnesses, tore the contract in half in front of the organizers, threw the pieces to the floor, and shouted, "If she's the Queen, then I'm the corpse she left behind in the tomb." She walked out without signing anything. By the time Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, Forever, was filmed on the 25th of March 1983 at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium, the tension between them had become part of industry legend. In front of 3,000 people and millions watching on television, Mary walked toward Diana to join in on the final harmonies, a symbolic moment that, for many, should have represented reconciliation. Instead, it turned into another wound. According to those on set, Diana turned, pushed Mary's microphone away, and leaned in to whisper, "It's been taken care of." Moments later, Mary's sound was cut from the broadcast. Her voice was silenced, her presence reduced to a picture with no audio. Under layers of mascara and stage makeup, Mary forced a bitter smile, but in her eyes, witnesses said, you could see the look of someone who had just been shot through the heart by the same hand that once held hers in the middle of shared dreams. After the show, Mary didn't return to the hotel with the others. Instead, she got in her car and drove all night back toward Detroit. A close friend later claimed that Mary was so shaken, so consumed, that she nearly veered into the highway divider because her hands were trembling on the wheel. Through tears, she was reported to have said, "I don't understand why she hates me so much. I used to love her, but she only loved herself." 3 years later, on the 19th of June, 1986, Mary Wilson released her memoir, Dream Girl, My Life as a Supreme. In its pages, she described Diana as a woman who climbed to the throne by stepping on other people's shoulders and never looking back to pull anyone up. Diana's response was not an angry statement or a lawsuit. It was silence. Motown, according to reports, pulled back its support. The invitations slowed, the opportunities dried up. But Mary refused to disappear quietly. In 2000, when the Return to Love reunion tour was proposed, the numbers told the same old story in a new decade. Diana allegedly demanded $15 million. Mary, according to reports, was offered a fraction around $4 million. At a meeting on February 9, Mary slammed her fist on the table and declared in a low, steady voice that echoed in the quiet room, "I'm not coming back just to stand next to the person who stabbed me in the back in front of all of America." She walked out, left the deal behind, and chose her dignity over the money. On the 8th of February 2021, Mary Wilson died in her sleep at her home in Las Vegas. She was in her bedroom, alone, when her story ended. But what was found there suggested she had never truly stopped holding on to the past. In a worn wooden box, tucked away like a secret, there was a black and white photograph of 3 young girls, Mary, Diana, and Florence, hugging each other in 1962. Beside it lay a crumpled handwritten letter that read, "I miss you every night, but I'll have to go alone. D." Mary never released that letter to the press. She never read it on television, never displayed it in interviews. She kept it hidden for decades because, as some friends later said, she understood that certain wounds are not meant to be healed in public. They simply exist, like a curse sealed deep in the bones. For Mary Wilson, the story could be summed up in one sentence. She was believed to have confided to someone close. She once loved a woman, and that woman killed her, not with a weapon, but with the applause of the crowd. If Florence Ballard was the first woman Diana Ross was believed to have loved in silence, and Mary Wilson was the sister who held her hand through every early storm, then Cher was the one who, according to many who watched from the sidelines, dragged Diana into the most complicated emotion of all, part obsession, part possessiveness, and in the end, something she could no longer bear. The chapter between Diana and Cher begins in 1975. At that point, Diana Ross had just released her 6th solo album and was tightening her grip on the title of Motown's reigning queen. Cher, freshly divorced from Sonny Bono on June 26, was rebuilding herself in front of America's eyes with the Cher Show, daring costumes, and later, songs like Take Me Home. Both women were reinventing their power at the same time. They were said to have first really connected at an Oscars after-party on the 31st of March 1975 at Quincy Jones's house. Both showed up dressed in black, cutting through the crowd like twin shadows. Cher lit a cigarette. Diana laughed softly and, according to people who remembered the moment, joked, "We don't need men. We still dominate this room." Cher would later refer to that encounter more than once. Witnesses said that from the moment they met that night, they barely left each other's side. From 1975 to 1979, Diana and Cher were frequently spotted together at parties in Beverly Hills, Palm Springs, and inside the neon-soaked walls of Studio 54. There was one reported incident on the 17th of November, 1976, when they were seen leaving the Beverly Wilshire Hotel at 2 a.m., hand in hand, after a private party hosted by Barbra Streisand. The tabloids wrote it off as Cher leaning on Diana to get over her breakup with Greg Allman, her second husband. But people closer to both women claimed the truth was more ambiguous. They called it a relationship that was too close to be just friends and too blurry to ever go public. That fragile balance shattered when Gene Simmons entered the story. In January 1978, Cher went public with her romance with Gene Simmons, the theatrical bassist from Kiss. She introduced him as her first serious boyfriend after Sonny. They moved into a Malibu mansion together, an odd but mesmerizing couple that fascinated Hollywood. Diana knew exactly who Gene was. She had already met him at an Earth, Wind and Fire concert and, according to those there, kept her interactions with him cool and distant. One day, Cher allegedly told Diana, almost annoyed, "Gene wants to buy me a necklace, but I hate diamonds." Diana's response, as it was later recounted, was a light chuckle and the words, "Well, let me pick it out for him." In December 1979, Gene Simmons flew to New York to buy Christmas gifts for Cher. It was there that Diana Ross stepped in, openly at first. They went shopping, Tiffany. Bergdorf moving through department stores like a power pair. The evening ended with martinis at the Carlyle Hotel. In his memoir, Gene would later admit, "I knew I crossed the line that night." From that moment on, he and Diana began seeing each other in secret, even as he was still living with Cher in Malibu. Not long after, Cher reportedly received a phone call from an insider. The message was ice cold. Gene had stayed at Diana's home for 3 nights in a row. Cher didn't scream. She didn't demand explanations. According to those who knew her then, she quietly packed up her things, left the Malibu house, and cut off all contact with Diana Ross. What destroyed their bond wasn't just the fact that a man had been taken from her. It was the feeling that the person who had done it was someone she had once trusted completely. Diana hadn't simply fallen for Gene Simmons. According to people around them, she had taken the man while Cher was still sitting next to him in public, like at a Donna Summer concert, where they reportedly watched the show together. Just 2 days later, Diana appeared at Gene's birthday party wearing a white dress almost identical to the one Cher had worn at the 1977 American Music Awards. To outsiders, it was just a fashion choice. To those who knew the history, it felt like a silent, surgical cut. Soon after, Diana and Gene stepped out of the shadows and into the cameras. From February 1980 until early 1983, they were publicly known as a couple. They walked the Met Gala together on the 4th of May, 1981, and the media labeled them untouchable. A glamorous pairing, a power alliance. But beneath the headlines, there was a truth Diana reportedly never admitted out loud. Gene never loved her with the same intensity he once had for Cher. In a 2002 interview, Gene Simmons himself said, "I loved Cher, but I was drawn to Diana like an addiction." It was a sentence that summed up the imbalance. Cher had been home. Diana, perhaps, was the high. By 1983, the relationship between Diana and Gene had run its course. When he left, there were no public scenes, no visible breakdowns. Diana didn't sob in front of cameras or issue statements, but those around her claimed she shifted. She laughed less. She went out less. And one rule became unmistakable. No one was allowed to say Cher's name in her presence. During a photo shoot in 1985, when a stylist casually mentioned wanting to try a Cher-style hairstyle, Diana reportedly cut him off mid-sentence. "She's no longer part of my life," Diana said. "Don't mention her." The message was clear. That entire chapter had been erased. For over 30 years, Diana Ross avoided Cher's name. Not in interviews, not on stage, not in any televised tribute to the divas of the 1970 seconds. The woman she had once hugged under the mirrored ceiling of Studio 54, the one she allegedly called Soul Sister, was now a void. A missing name in a long list of acknowledgments. An absence that said more than any insult ever could. Cher, on the other hand, rarely spoke about Diana directly. She didn't write exposés, didn't go on talk shows to air their history. But she did let the truth leak out in fragments. During an appearance on The Graham Norton Show in 2013, when asked about Diana Ross, Cher smiled faintly and gave one simple line. "We were very close, but not everyone knows how to keep a friendship when they're sleeping with your lover." The comment was delivered with a shrug, almost light, almost casual. But for anyone who knew the background, it was a verdict. Cher never forgave her. Some people who have studied Diana Ross's relationships believe she once loved Cher in her own way. Perhaps it was in stolen glances after parties, when the crowd had thinned out and only the music remained. Perhaps it was in the quiet moments where they walked out of a club together at 3 a.m. Coats pulled tight, shoulders brushing. But, according to those who watched her career, Diana could never stand it when Cher shone brighter, when she was happier, when she was the one who seemed more loved. So she took what she could, the man, the trust, and then, when it was over, she left the friendship behind like a burned-out stage set. Not everyone Diana Ross was rumored to have loved ended up as an enemy. But with Cher, she made a choice: to sever the bond completely, to leave no trace, to act as if they had never mattered to each other. In the end, all that remained was a haunting possibility, that the woman Diana once called a sister might also have been the one she feared most, the one she believed could stand beside her on a red carpet, still smiling, while quietly aiming the sharpest knife at her back. If there was one woman who seemed to leave Diana Ross both spellbound and on edge, many insiders pointed to Chaka Khan. Both women stood as towering black divas at the height of their powers, icons, whom the world was told to admire, study, and never question. Yet behind that glittering narrative, it was said there once existed a connection between them that went beyond professional respect, an intimacy that blurred lines, followed by a single night that shattered everything and turned their bond into a long, frozen war. The story, as it has been retold, begins in early 1982. Diana Ross was still wearing the crown as Motown's undisputed queen. Chaka Khan had recently stepped away from Rufus to focus on her solo career, rising fast with a wild funk sound, a blazing voice, and a sensual stage energy that could swallow a room whole. In February of that year, Chaka reportedly performed 3 consecutive sold-out shows at the Savoy Theatre in New York. On the final night, as the crowd spilled out onto the cold streets, a black limousine was said to have pulled up quietly behind the venue. From it, Diana Ross emerged, no grand entourage, no security detail flanking her sides, just her figure slipping through the backstage entrance. According to people who were there, Chaka sat with Diana in her dressing room for nearly an hour after the show. No one knew exactly what they talked about, but when Diana walked back out, her makeup was slightly smudged, her smile softer, her eyes suspiciously wet. Chaka, by contrast, lit a cigarette and sat in silence, staring at the wall as if she didn't want anybody to break the moment. Those who observed them in the weeks that followed said the visit was not just a casual stop. After that night, Diana and Chaka began appearing together at select events in Los Angeles, never officially announced as close friends, yet standing just a little too close, hugging just a little too long. There was one rumored incident at an Oscars after-party in 1982 where the two were spotted holding hands as they slipped out a side door, ignoring the flash of photographers out front. When someone later asked Chaka if she was in love with Diana, she reportedly shrugged and said, "I love her energy, and I don't refuse affection from anyone." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a denial. It hovered somewhere in the space between. Whatever existed between them did not last. The divide, according to multiple accounts, opened wide in March 1983 at the taping of Motown 25. Yesterday, Today, Forever, a major television special meant to honor Motown's past and present. Diana Ross had been granted the honor of closing the show. Chaka Khan, at first, was invited to join her singing backup and sharing that final moment on stage. During rehearsal on March 22, Chaka reportedly arrived, prepared and ready for her part, only to be asked to step aside without a clear explanation. An audio technician later claimed that Diana walked in, saw Chaka's name on the rundown, and calmly told the director, "If she sings, I won't." After that, Diana was said to have pulled Berry Gordy, Motown's powerful founder, into a private meeting room. For 3 hours, the door stayed shut. When the meeting ended, the decision was made. Chaka Khan was removed from the main performance. The climactic moment of Motown 25 would belong to Diana Ross alone. On the 25th of March 1983, the night of the official taping, Chaka still attended. She took her seat in the audience, blending into the shadows, as the temperature outside dropped and a cool breeze moved around the Pasadena Civic Auditorium. When Diana began singing "Someday We'll Be Together," a song that had once been sold as a symbol of sisterhood and unity, Chaka did not applaud. According to a friend who accompanied her, Chaka quietly stood up before the song ended and walked out of the hall. Later that night, slightly tipsy and exhausted, she was said to have muttered, "She doesn't want me standing next to her. She's afraid the light will hit me instead of her." After that evening, the silence between them hardened into something more permanent. Chaka Khan was never invited to perform alongside Diana Ross again. No duets, no joint tours, no surprise appearances where they shared a mic and rewrote history. At one point, a producer reportedly tried to bring them together for a re-recording of I'm Every Woman, the anthem Chaka made famous, and Whitney Houston later turned into a global hit. Diana's alleged answer was simple: I won't sing her song. I don't want anything to do with her. As Diana continued to work acting in films, touring, collecting awards, Chaka's journey took a darker turn. By 1989, she had entered rehab for cocaine addiction. In 2004, she was sued after her dog reportedly bit a delivery person at her home. In 2006, she was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence. According to police reports from that period, she shouted at one point, "I don't need Motown. I don't need Diana Ross." The outburst shook the industry not because Diana's name was mentioned, but because even after decades, it was clear that something